Let's start with the Iranians. People talk a lot about a calibrated response. What do you think the Iranians hoped to achieve last night?
They certainly hoped to achieve some hits, and they got some. They seem to have got 7 hits on the Nevatim airbase, which is symbolically important to them, because the Nevatim base is the base, it's the F-35 base, it's a big airbase in the Negev desert, which is where
F-35 fighters.
Exactly. The F-35s took off from there to bomb the consulate in Syria, in Damascus, on the 1st of April. So, as far as the Iranians are concerned, they've hit the base from which the strike against their consulate was launched. So, symbolically, that's important. It is reported that they've done some damage to outbuildings, but there is no casualties. It has been reported around the Arab world that the base has completely been wiped off the map, which is clearly not true. So they got 7 missiles, ballistic missiles through. They launched, it seems, this is from IDF figures, the Israeli defence figures, they launched 110 ballistic missiles, and 7 of them got through. They launched 36 cruise missiles, none of them got through. They launched 185 drones, none of them got through. So statistically, less than 1% of their missiles got through, but the 7 ballistic missiles that may, if all 7 hit the airbase, that gives them a symbolic victory. So, you know, any reasonable person might say, well, that's tit for tat in terms of Damascus on the 1st of April and now the base from which the attack was launched now. Maybe that should be an end to it. Any reasonable person might say that. But we're dealing here with Netanyahu as Prime Minister and Ali Khamenei as the Supreme Leader.
And we are not talking about reasonable...
Neither of them are particularly reasonable.
The situation doesn't make anybody reasonable.
No, exactly. I mean, and this is... You know, this round of conflict, this particular iteration, started with the Israelis going after IRGC generals and, you know, in an embassy. Now, going after IRGC generals is acceptable in the sense that they are attacking Israel, and so Israel goes after them wherever they can find them. But going after them in a consular building in Damascus is specifically against international law. It's very provocative. The Israelis seem to do it out of the blue, almost as if they wanted to provoke Iran to see how much Iran would do in response. And the Iranians are now saying that this is the end of it. They have said, this is our response. Now, whether they'll stick to that, we don't know. But they've probably got enough out of this. 7 out of 331 missiles got through. That's a pretty low percentage. But if the symbolism of hitting the airbase is good enough, then maybe they'll say, that's it, we don't want any more.
So the outcome here was never really meant to be, as it were, a military advantage, but more one of storytelling, if I can put it that way, particularly presumably to their own people, because it's not going to convince anybody else, particularly.
Absolutely. And that storytelling began a few hours ago with editorials being written in newspapers and across the Arab media that the airbase has been wiped off the face of the earth, which it clearly hasn't. So, you know, people's different narratives might actually be a way out of this iteration of the crisis. But everyone assumes that Israel, having been struck... Now, this is inside Israeli territory, albeit the Negev desert down in the south. But given that Iranian missiles have now struck inside Israel, will the Israelis say, well, we're not going to respond? The general view is that everyone will tell them not to respond. The Americans will certainly lean on them not to respond. Look, this is enough. This has gone far enough, and this now completes this cycle of violence from the 1st of April to now. But that Netanyahu won't be restrained because he's getting something out of this widening of the war. It keeps him in power.
Well, let's try to understand what the Israeli motivation here is. Starting with, what do you think the advantage of attacking a consular building was, given that, as you say, it's not unique, but it's very, very unusual, and it was bound to provoke a response?
Yes. I mean, the advantage of doing it is that you know that you're going to catch a number of people there, and so the people that they were after were in the building, and that it's a single target, and so technically it's a good target to hit, but it's a very bad target to hit in terms of legality, in terms of the perception. And, you know, Israel has operated its war with Iran, its proxy war with Iran for the last 30-odd years in a rather choreographed way. And this was taking a step outside the normal choreography, because the Israelis would say, well, look at what happened on the 7th of October. That was outside the normal choreography in a big way. The old rules rules don't apply. But the rest of the world has a problem with this. You know, the Western world wants to support Israel, but they make it really difficult for Israel's supporters outside to keep on supporting them when they push the boundaries all the time. In specific terms and in general terms.
The other side question, as it were, the military strategy here, which is, for me anyway, quite hard to understand. Yeah. Why open a new front when you've already got a major thing going on to the south in Gaza?
Because the war in Gaza is not going terribly well for Israel. It is strategically incoherent now. The Israelis, in December, they had 18 brigades inside Gaza, about 90,000 troops. Then they went down to 1 brigade. They've just put a 2nd brigade in. So they've now got 2 brigades inside Gaza now, about 6,000 troops, which are not capable of doing anything other than keeping the road open that the Israelis have driven from east to west. It's not clear where that offensive is going or what they're getting out of it, because day after day they're losing politically because of the civilian casualties and their failure to really finish off Hamas. So the logic of widening this war is that for Netanyahu, it begins to address for him his view of the real enemy. A number of people inside the Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli defense establishment are saying, look, Hamas are not our real enemy. Hamas are a nuisance that we've lived with now since 2006, 2007. Our real enemy is Iran, and our real enemy locally is Hezbollah, who are the clients of Iran. The time has come to leave Hamas on one side and address the bigger issue, because this is now an existential crisis for us. This is the biggest crisis since 1948. Our existence is on the line. Get to the real enemy. There is a sense in which, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, that is now the line of thinking.